Spencer McIntosh, agronomist with Golden Harvest, and today I want to talk to you about aflatoxin in corn. So today when we talk about aflatoxin, I'm talking specifically about Kansas, northern Oklahoma area that I cover. Aflatoxin is more of an intermittent issue here. We see it in our hotter years, so this information may not relate to central southern Texas, the Delta, these types of areas that have more annual pressure and typically higher levels than what we see. So first of all, when we talk about aflatoxin, it originates from a mold called Aspergillus flavus, an ear mold. When you see it on the ear, it kind of looks like an olive green, kind of a dull green to brown color. It's really kind of a puffy, dusty type material. And when we talk about the mold itself, it doesn't seem to cause as much yield loss or grain degradation like we might see from a fusarium or diplodia type ear mold. So from yielding grain, not very damaging. The problem is that it can produce a mycotoxin called aflatoxin. And so when we talk about Aspergillus flavus, it likes to take advantage of heat and drought stress on the corn. And when we talk about that, it's really heat seems to be the primary driver. And so when we see heat stress specifically, but drought stress combined with that even in our late vegetative stages to early reproductive stages, that is when we have the highest risk of seeing potentially Aspergillus infections and potentially aflatoxin in that grain. So fields that might be at higher risk year in year out would be later planting corn on our dry land or replant situations where in most years we're probably going to see more heat prior to pollination and limited water situations later in the season, so more heat and drought stress in those types of situations, and that can be corn to really kind of watch and monitor for aflatoxin. But Mother Nature ultimately holds the cards here. If she deals us a bad enough hand in any year, if we get heat and stress early enough as we go into pollination, really any of these fields can be at risk. And so what can we do? I can tell you in our market we've had really good success with utilizing AgroSure Viptera trait. And the AgroSure Viptera trait is different from the other insect traits on the market is in the way that it's expressed in the plant. So it's expressed in all the green tissue, so the leaves, the husks, the silks. And what this really helps with is that one of our primary drivers to getting the mold in the ear is corn earworm. And so a little bit about corn earworms, they lay a single egg at a time, and they'll lay it here towards the tip of the husk or on these little husk leaves, or a lot of times where they prefer to lay it is actually on these silks, a lot of times with about an inch at the end of the husk. And as those eggs hatch, those larvae inherently have evolved and know that if they follow that silk down into the ear, they have a readily available food source and they have protection from predators. So when they tunnel into that ear, it compromises the natural protection that this ear has from ear modes, in that this ear, it has this nice husk. A lot of times in our market we like corns with long husk covers like this, but then these silks fill up the tip of the husk, and that basically is creating a barrier to ear modes getting down and into the ear. And so what happens is when the earworms feed and they tunnel in, they compromise this protection, and then the earworms themselves are pretty hairy. They have a lot of spines on them. They can actually carry the spores into the ear with them and inoculate the ear. So they can be a real problem son and give the mold an entry point. And so that's why we've had a lot of success with AgroSure Viptera in that where it's expressing all this tissue. When that egg hatches and that larvae just takes a couple bites out of the silk or even the husk, it's dead before it can ever do any tunneling into the ear. And that's what makes that trait different. So we've had really good success with that. Another product we can utilize is called Afliguard, and Afliguard is a really interesting product. It's actually grain that's inoculated with another subspecies of Aspergillus flavus, but that species is actually benign or non-toxigenic in that it does not produce any mycotoxins. And so when we utilize that product, we're basically taking advantage of a sibling rivalry, in that what we want to do is when we broadcast that grain, if we can get it out there late vegetative stages, really for sure prior to silk, but it tends to work best in that 10 to 12 leaf stage, but prior to tassel, get the inoculum out there, and it will want to attack and invade the same areas as the toxic form of Aspergillus flavus. So if we can provide the inoculum and give it a competitive advantage, it can attack these sites and outcompete the toxic form of Aspergillus flavus, and thereby limit the amount of aflatoxin we can see in the grain. So a product that can be really effective if it's used correctly and can give us some tools if we maybe don't have AgroSure Viptera, or in really high pressure years and in the, like I mentioned, in the deep south where they have a lot of pressure, they will combine AflaGuard with the AgroSure Viptera trait to provide as much protection as possible. So another thing I get questions about is, well, can I just control the earworm chemically? So this is kind of challenging. You know, when we want to control earworms from an economical standpoint of just preventing damage, economical damage to the ear, we can be pretty effective with products like Besiege, which contain 2 modes of action. The chlorantraniliprole in there actually is absorbed by the material and can provide good residual. And then the lambda cyhalothrin in there is alvicidal activities and can give us some quick knockdown. So it's a really good product, and it can prevent economic damage and give us an advantage there. But to protect against aflatoxin really, again, stresses the driver, but we have to prevent all ear damage. And so, you know, with you know, chemical control, there are going to be some escapes and can be later season infestations. And so, you know, it's not quite as straightforward as what we can see from the trait itself, AgroSure Viptera, or from AflaGuard. So, you know, not as consistent. So I wouldn't really, you know, recommend just doing that just simply to control aflatoxin. So the other thing we want to look at is with most of our grain modes, and this includes Aspergillus flavus, if we have long dry down periods, that mode can be active, and especially active around that 18 to 19% moisture stage. So if we have the ability to harvest the corn early and dry it down, this can help prevent aflatoxin levels building up in the grain as it's drying down. So, you know, any way we can harvest, especially around 22 to 24% moisture, and rapidly dry that grain, hopefully in a 24 to 48 hour period, that's really going to help limit the aflatoxin levels in the grain. So one of the management aspects is, you know, potentially if you can harvest early, dry the grain down, can maybe help mitigate some aflatoxin levels. So the other important thing is that we really need to think about when we're having aflatoxin, hearing about it, or having these years, is, you know, what fields were most at risk, what fields have been through a lot of stress, but then we need to keep track of what do we have planted where. We need to keep good planting records, and specifically on traits. And this could be even in the same field. If we have trait differences, we could see different aflatoxin levels potentially in the grain in different areas of the field. So first of all, our highest risk is going to be fields that contain no insect trait or insect traits which are not AgroSure Viptera. So with these other traits or not having any insect traits, basically we're going to see damage to the ear, and it's going to give Aspergillus flavus a little bit of a head start to get in there and get established. Okay. The second level of protection we're going to have is easy refuge. So when we talk about AgroSure Viptera easy refuge, we have 95% AgroSure Viptera traded. So this will be a 3220 or 5222. But then we have 5% non-BT corn in there. And so the non-BT corn, the 5%, is going to be susceptible to earworm damage and could potentially harbor some Aspergillus flavus and aflatoxin, and so could provide a way for aflatoxin to enter into the ear and see some infection levels. And then our highest level of protection is going to be in our 3111 or 3110. So that's an 80-20 refuge configuration, and in the 80% refuge area, 100% of those plants contain the AgroSure Viptera trait, and that's going to give us the highest level of protection from seeing Aspergillus flavus infect the grain and potentially having aflatoxin. Now for that 20% block refuge area that's non-BT corn, that's going to be a high risk area. And so if we have these in the same field, we can see vastly different areas in the refuge area versus the traded area. And so that's where I talk about, you know, understand your planting records, understand what's planted where, and as we go into the fall, as you're harvesting and getting into some of these different trait stacks, you may want to harvest some grain and get it tested and see what the aflatoxin levels are prior from really getting into that field and cutting some big loads, and for sure mixing the grain, so we kind of understand going into it what we're looking at. If we do have some aflatoxin, if you can segregate that grain, that's great to prevent that mixing, or set aside maybe some fields with higher levels towards the end of harvest to be able to manage it. So just wanted to come in, provide a little bit of an overview and some information on aflatoxin. So first of all, heat, drought stress are the key drivers. AgroSure Viptera we've had really good success limiting our aflatoxin levels with this trait. AflaGuard is a tool we can use, and then drying grain down quickly is the other thing. So hope this helps provide some clarity around aflatoxin, what the risks are, and ways we could potentially manage it. If you have any questions, don't be afraid to reach out to your Golden Harvest Seed Advisor, to your Golden Harvest sales rep, or myself, and I'd be happy to visit with you. Thanks.